Greetings, flesh creatures. It is I, Megatron. On behalf of TFYLP, I want to congratulate you for listening to the most refined collective podcast on this miserable little planet Earth. Yes. Here you'll find knowledgeable fans discussing every aspect of Transformers and beyond. Now, enjoy the show while I continue my path to complete conquest of all of you miserable biological entities. Predacons, terrorize!
On live here.
3 years ago, before COVID.
There you go, Paul. Hi, welcome to TFYLP, episode 469. We are live tonight, Monday, February 21st. I'm Lucas. I am joined tonight by Phil.
Shout out.
And Christian.
What up?
And Paul.
How bizarre.
So Paul, do you want to continue whatever story that you were apparently saying when the credits were rolling here?
I was just telling Christian that I went on a vacation once, which I don't think I'll ever go on again. So it's a nice trip down memory lane.
No more vacations for anybody these days.
So before we jump in the main topic, I just want to come back to the shout-outs.
Shout outs.
Christian and I were just talking about that we watched the Marvel Legends Hasbro Pulse event today, and it is not just the Transformer team that is shouting out to everything. Like, seriously, if you did a shot every time they said shout out on one of these, like, you would be severely inebriated fairly early in the morning. So, like, I'm just picturing these dudes just all walking through the Hasbro offices, just like, shout out.
There was an excessive amount of shout outs on that live stream today. It was at least a dozen. Which is good. I mean, they're giving shout outs where shout outs are due, but my goodness.
I mean, I think just open a thesaurus at that point.
I agree. Shout out to the sources.
I'm sure that they'd be more than happy to take your feedback, Phil.
Yeah.
So.
Alternatively, we could use our other group name and say the sources in this economy.
Yes. Exactly.
Oh boy. There you go.
We only have two sayings at TFYLP cast, so that's what you get.
I'm sure we have something else as well. I'm sure
it's just the two.
Viewers can.
Yeah, we can't say them in front of Paul though.
Oh, okay. There you go. So tonight's topic.
What is our main topic?
Okay, so I guess in the past we have had a show when Duran was the host about what should they do once G1 fans have aged out of Transformers or whatever, just moved on to other things and whatnot. And so I figured, I was like, I'm going to put a little different spin on it. And my question is not necessarily like what to do when they, move on, whatever, is should we move on from G1? Should we, should this just be a rehash, down the road, slight differences, or, should we completely just flip the script and do something completely different with Transformers? So that's kind of the topic idea for the show tonight. So yeah, Paul, I know that you had some thoughts on this.
Well, you framed it in such a way that I can't really find a way to be an old man curmudgeon the way I was expecting to. But to honestly answer your question, should we move on from G1? I mean, I would entertain it. Like, I would like that. I think they should take some risks, but as we have kind of come to the conclusion time and time again over the years that I've been on the show, it's that whatever they're doing is working right now, and they're not going to really rock the boat until things are not working. And that's when you shift people around and you say, like, try something new. And they've it's taken Hasbro many years to figure out what all the fans knew is like what is good about Transformers. You know, there was some rocky moments in the 2000s during the revival, but they've like really hit on it now. You know, like this stuff's amazing. Like, you know, like the toys we're getting right now are crazy awesome. These are some of the best we've ever gotten. So I would say I would like to see them go somewhere else. And when I say that, I don't think we've ever actually deviated from G1 because G1 is Transformers. The concepts and stuff laid out, that it's people call it G1. What they're really saying is they don't like a certain like aesthetic choice, but like G1 is Transformers. Optimus Prime exists because of Transformers or because of G1. That is all these characters and concepts originated from the beginning, and they have not gone somewhere else. Sure, they've made a few new characters over the years, and that's great, and they should keep doing that. But ultimately, they get assimilated into the main Transformers thing. And don't tell me Beast Wars is not G1. It literally is G1. It is the continuation of the story. It is the same thing. Just it's in the future, but it's the same exact story. And like the Unicron trilogy, it's just G1 in a popcorn barrel. They shook it up a little bit and like gave it back to you. And that's how it's been ever since. It's never really deviated.
I would argue a little bit that the younger kid shows are kind of not really G1. So, you know, Rescue Bots, and I realize they tied Optimus Prime back to it. You know,
it's aligned. It's the Aligned trilogy, or the Aligned universe, which is, again, just another G1 retelling.
I mean, I don't know that it really was, though. Rescue Bots,
yeah,
like,
never
where did
really
they...
was.
The first episode has Optimus Prime.
No,
He's Cullen, and it was supposed to be Prime Optimus Prime.
Supposed to be, yes.
But, like, I mean, a lot of the themes and all that of Rescue Bots was not necessarily, you know, I mean, whatever. It's transforming robots. There was Optimus Prime, I'll give you that, but it wasn't the same story that we were saying, like, rehashed like all the other ones. And then the other one, we have no idea, but there's a new show coming on Netflix here pretty soon that may potentially not have Transformers Optimus Prime in that. What show is that, Christian?
It should not. Botbots.
There you go.
Optimus Prime should not appear at all because he does not exist in Botbots world.
That's actually good
for him.
Botbots is like the biggest
as a
deviation.
Fictional character in Botbots world. That's what Transformers seems to be for Botbots. It seems to be like some of the Botbots have Transformers licensing on them, but they're not. You see what I mean? It's fictional to them, like it's fictional to us.
So, like, Rescue Bots, Christian, is the one that I was thinking of with this question. And I get, you know, like Paul was saying, like Zaldron's saying, it is part of this aligned continuity. You had crossovers between the second and, you know, Robots in Disguise cartoon and Rescue Bots. But it was not Autobots versus Decepticons. It was not good guy transforming robots versus bad guy transforming robots. You know, the four main characters of Rescue Bots that were Transformers were not, you know, Blades was a name that had been used before, but these were not characters or personalities we had seen before, and they weren't doing the normal story things that we had seen from Transformers. So again, it's taking the idea of a vehicle that turns into a robot that has a personality. You know, there's definitely an element of Robots in Disguise with Rescue Bots that they were trying to stay hidden. But beyond that, I mean, yeah, you had Optimus Prime pop in, you know, every couple episodes, but he wasn't like, we got to go fight Megatron. It was like, yeah, we're going to save this island town and, you know, over and over again. And so it was, you know, story of the week, you know, kind of thing with that show. And it was fun. I liked it. I was bummed when it ended, and Rescue Bots Academy kind of continued on the same thing. You know, you had a few more touchstones to G1 in there. We had Grimlock as a teacher and Ratchet popped up. But again, this was not a, you know, galactic civil war that had been taking place for eons that you were thrown in the midst of.
So Morbot is not a Decepticon? Just question.
No, Morbot is not a Decepticon. It's not a. It's just a robot that transforms. It is not a. It is created on Earth by a time traveling scientist and has no personality.
So I'm glad you brought those two options up, because if I had to choose some that were like as far away from G1 as possible, I kind of forgot about BotBots, but that is like actually the furthest, the most deviating from what we know as like the Transformers master brand as anything, and probably Rescue Bots. Although that's, I just, it literally is in that aligned continuity. So
Oh yeah, and you have Optimus Prime. You have Peter Cullen voice Optimus Prime in it. This is not like some other voice actor. This is legit G1 Optimus Prime showing up, but it's the least feeling of a G1 cartoon.
Yeah, and from a marketing perspective, it came out when Prime came out, and it was meant to work in parallel with, it's like this was the kid brand, Prime's ways up, and then there's the movies. That was kind of how it was supposed to be.
But I mean, I would argue they probably didn't tie it enough to the other subsequent cartoons. Because, like at the beginning, you mentioned that Prime was going when Rescue Bots started. And then I think it was, RID, Robots in Disguise, the 2015 or whatever, that was kind of at the end. But, like, it was very loosely connected. So I feel like it wasn't as sticky for some of those kids that when they're done watching Rescue Bots, they didn't necessarily go, oh, I need to make sure and, go watch this next show, because that's what the big kids watch and whatever kind of deal. So, but I mean, it was an absolutely fantastic show. And I think that, I know Anna a lot of times would bring up that, she's kind of sick of the warring storylines and all that. And I mean, this absolutely was like, they told really good stories. And I mean, I would say it was engaging enough for me to watch, with my kids when they were younger. So I definitely think it's good. And I think, isn't the new show coming out, I think was done by some of the producers of Rescue Bots. Is that right? The Earthspark?
Some of the team who had worked on that are working on Earthspark. And, I think if you look at the quality of Rescue Bots, like, you had top tier voice actors in that show. You had high quality animation, like all around. That was a well done show. And I think there were some stickiness, but it's sort of one of those things where you couldn't do full on crossovers between Prime or Robots in Disguise and Rescue Bots, because you can't go have little kids go watch the bigger kids show. That wouldn't necessarily work. But you did have, you had Sideswipe from RID came in an episode of Rescue Bots, and then Blur from Rescue Bots made the jump to RID. So, there was, swapping back and forth of those characters. But again, the storylines were very, very far apart. But, again, it's thematically the most different from anything G1 that we've had.
But I mean, my question too is that, we brought up Beast Wars and, the Transformers movie as well. And I think really, that's kind of a debate amongst fans, I'm sure, that, are these continuities really overlapping? Are the themes like, overlapping with some of the stuff? I don't know. And all of us, we've, been annoyed that they have the Bayverse and some of the stuff that he's done. And we think that they should go back to G1, right? But, for the movie fans and some of the people who only like the movies, is that necessarily a bad thing? Would they, if they don't tie it in with the Bayverse and make it more G1ified, is that necessarily going to be a bad thing at the box office potentially? For like the average casual, moviegoer that says, "Oh, I like Transformers," but what they mean is they like the Bay movies.
I think what you're going to have is, and I think what a lot of Transformers fans have been hoping, G1 Transformers fans have been hoping that we get a reset on the Transformers movies. That the Bay aesthetic, some people liked, some people didn't like. To me, the storytelling of a Michael Bay movie is what I dislike the most. You know, the aesthetic wasn't something I was entirely enamored with, but I like some of the designs. You know, some I thought were like, you know, but others, you know, did pretty well. And especially once you started getting the Studio Series toys, and you started to see like, all right, here's really good toys of what those designs are. You appreciate it a little bit more. But you know, what I keep thinking back to with this question is, you know, look at Batman, look at Superman, look at Spider-Man, look at how long those characters have existed, and in how many iterations they have existed. And yes, you've gotten moments where Batman gets replaced and Superman gets replaced, and there's new Spider-Man and that join the fray and all of that. And those are fun. Those add to it, but it always comes back to the core of Peter Parker Spider-Man, Bruce Wayne Batman, Clark Kent Superman, you know, and so those are the stories that keep getting retold over and over again. So Transformers is likely to be one of those brands.
Yeah, I think you're right. 100%. Go ahead.
That is funny with Batman, where they're like, "Oh, we're really going to dive into his origin story," and I was like, "Yes, why we? None of us have ever, viewed Batman's origin story or read about it in the comics. Like, you know, I don't know. It's always frustrating to me on a lot of those, you know, big name properties like that. It's like, please, can we just get past whatever the origin and your parents dying and all that kind of thing? Because it's just, I don't know. It's for the thousandth time.
Spoilers, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, Phil, because I think that was definitely like where the conversation needs to go. But it's like, what elements what are the core elements that make something a Transformers story? And what I'm saying is all those are G1 elements, because that's where they came from. So it's like, I don't care what you say. Like, Armada was a retelling of G1. Everything with Optimus versus Megatron and the Autobots and Decepticons is always a retelling of G1. And even like Car Robots and RID is the same thing, even though that got kind of weird because it had like Destrongers and like, you know, they started flipping the script on some things, like Optimus and Ultra Magnus were now brothers. And it's like, whoa, that's new. Anytime one of these stories shifts some of those core dynamics you're used to, that's what's interesting. But they never go like whole hog with it. It's always like a few little things are different. Like Animated's a great example where Prowl's now a motorcycle, and you know Megatron was not even in the show for so long, and Magnus is a higher you know, Optimus isn't the leader. He's like a young kind of like scrappy dude. And that was so cool. It's still a regurgitation of G1. It's just flipping the script a bit, which is great.
It's changing the window
dressing.
dressing.
Splitting hairs and be using semantics here, but I want to call that like an echo as opposed to a regurgitation or a retelling, because it's not the same story. Sure. But no. you see those elements continue across all these places. And I think that's what you're saying.
It's not the same story, but like they all like start from the same place in general. There's a planet called Cybertron, and they somehow get to Earth. You know, like they weren't That's what's interesting, at least about Earthspark, that I'll give it, that Phil pointed out, is like this is a story of Transformers born on Earth. They all still came from Cybertron originally, and like got here somehow, and there was all this history I'm sure they'll delve into in the story. But it's like, oh, like that's kind of a new thing to talk about. We haven't really, it's always been sort of a hand wavy thing, you know, like, oh, the aerial, we built these guys in a cave, you know, like no one cares. But like, hey, that might have like some real repercussions for a Cybertronian if they aren't really a Cybertronian, they're an Earthian. So that's kind of cool.
The only time that's been really addressed was in the BotCon 2010 G2 comic, because the G2 dudes did have citizenship wherever they were. That's how Pyro got to become Sir Pyro. He was knighted. because he was constructed in the UK. I don't know, man. I don't write
Crazy.
the stories. I just report them. Okay.
Yeah, sure. I guess
don't write the stories or read those stories for that matter.
like here's a great example, like of a non G1 story, which so Diaclone or Microman or whatever, that has nothing. That is a retelling of another universe, completely separate. The names are even different, but the look on the robots are the same. Like there is a non G1 story, and it predates G1, and most people don't like it because it's not Autobots, it's not Decepticons. The robots aren't even sentient; they're piloted by the Microman dudes. But that is literally what a new story, a fully new story, would feel and be like. So if you don't like that, and you like Transformers to have enough of the stuff in it that you care about, then you like G1, no matter when you were born. Sorry, that's the way it is. You like Soundwave to be blue? Cool, you like G1 in some shape or form. And I just don't think those things are going to go away. Because they've tried to do things in the past, like the G2 era, you know, like what is it called? The KB toy line, Machine Wars, you know, where like they just threw the names on random people. Like that kind of makes people feel weird when like Megatron's a teal jet versus a silver gun or a silver tank even. You know, like it's too far removed from what people expect from Megatron.
You need to have touchstones that come back to what people know. And again, that's what I talk about Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, because all those characters have touchstones that, you know, how many different Batman TV shows and movies have they done? I mean, I'm not talking about individual movies, but you know, the Tim Burton, you know, movies, then the you know, we've got a new Batman movie that's about to come out, and Christopher Nolan movies, you know, and then the Adam West TV show and the show Gotham, like all of these, you know, shows, all of these movies are telling a variation of the same story, but the story is about a kid whose parents are killed, and he decides to go and become a crime fighter and fight this menagerie of bad dudes. And you know, I think, you know, you're always going to get that. I think the worst comment I ever heard about a Batman franchise came from the director Joel Schumacher, who directed the second two Batman movies after Tim Burton, Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. And he just said in an interview, like, you know, I think at this point Batman just needs to move on. Like his parents died, and he just needs to move on and needs to move past that. And that's the story that we're telling. It's like, no, he can't move on. He can't move past it. That's the point. That's why he dresses up in a leather suit and beats the snot out of dudes every night, because he can't get past it.
You're talking about a Batman that just goes to bed at night.
Right, exactly. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm rich.
Yeah.
Ladies who like me, and I'm handsome. Like, this is cool. Like, look at this car I just made. Like, what if I make 10,000 of those and put $100,000 price tag on it? I'd be even richer.
Yeah, I mean, the story is like, what could mess up a dude that's got everything going for him so bad that he would ignore the fact that he's the richest dude in the world and go bust up people every night?
I don't see Elon Musk like going out there and just like, I'm gonna put a big symbol on my Tesla. And
well, you know, I wouldn't
know
put it
that for
past
sure.
her. Yes,
Yeah.
just say.
But I mean, again, there are foundational story points to what makes Transformers, and that came from G1. And there are few examples that we have where it hasn't touched upon that. And so, you know, it'll be interesting to see how far they get away from that. But in the majority of Transformers media, it has had that foundation at its core.
Well, I feel like, too, it's like, all right, I'm running this $1 billion franchise here. I'm going to go ahead and throw it all out the window and completely, like, reinvent a brand new story. You know, it can work on a small scale, like the BotBots, like how we mentioned, and you know, Rescue Bots, whatever. But at the end of the day, you know, we want the elements, like, you know, if you're watching a Transformers show, you're expecting certain things.
I think if the movies had failed in 2007, we'd be having a different conversation. But they didn't.
Yeah.
They made a whole ton of money. But just like the shift from G1 and G2 to Beast Wars, they're in the same continuity. They do have some echoes, but it's a whole new cast of characters. It's a whole different design aesthetic. They were trying something brand new that they hadn't done before. I mean, they had stuff turn into animals, but it wasn't organic kind of animals. Anyway, big tonal shift. They even shifted it over to the Kenner divisions instead of the Hasbro divisions just to try and get some new blood, something new working. And they did. It worked. And they kind of brought it back, to G1 type things later with Armada.
The question I'd like to pose is like, what are those touchstones? What is the core of Transformers? And something that I've always said is it's the characters, the voices, the look, it's the whole package of like you could have just had cool transforming robots that were piloted by other people, but there's Diaclone, but then the characters would be the pilots, but it's interesting because these robots are so animated and fussy, and they have attitudes. Like to me, that's what's so great is like those characters and those voice actors and the look was what really sealed the deal for me. And I guess it comes from the bios written by Budiansky, perhaps. That's maybe the starting point.
It's why we have so much love for Transformers and less love for GoBots these days.
Yeah.
Two franchises, same time, doing the same thing, but the writing on Transformers I think was better.
And the animation on GoBots was god awful. Well, so what are the touchstones then?
I mean, I think one of the big things is the war between the Autobots and Decepticons. And, Aaron in the chat was saying, what if we end the war? And I know that was a big thing that they touched on in the IDW comics in Phase 2. And would that work as a show or as a movie to do that?
The only thing that worked for me, the only thing that really worked for me, the Robots in Disguise book was pretty good, but More Than Meets the Eye, we always talk about it. That's post-war. That's mostly them having Star Trek-like adventures on a ship, going out and discovering new things. That works for me, but even then, there's still some conflict between Autobots and Decepticons.
Well, the war still had to happen for that story to work, though. Like,
correct.
It's in the shadow of the war. Like, what if the war? Is there another type of conflict? Yeah, is there another type of conflict, like effervescent conflict for a whole story that could exist that isn't related to two warring factions?
If Catherine's around, she'll probably tell you that IDW 2 is like a classism thing.
Well, IDW kind of touched on some of that too, as well, like
IDW 1,
functionalist universe and all that.
Ultimately, those kind of conflicts lead to war.
They do.
Yeah,
could you have The Office with Transformers? Well, then what does it change?
Then
it's just
a comedy.
The Office. Now they're robots.
Maybe that's the BotBots show. Is The Office?
Maybe
that
Their
totally
office
could work.
Your stapler, and the staple and staple remover are having a passionate love story, but their love must be kept secret at all times, because who would ever think a stapler and a staple remover could ever be together?
Okay, actually, can I talk about the story of BotBots? We don't know really the story of the show yet, but
I'm pretty sure we can gather it from that one image.
Yes, from the one image you can tell everything. But they've released an easy to read kids book, like kids' first longer book thing. It's not a picture book; it's the intermediate reader kind of thing. Anyway, that conflict is like a personal conflict about finding belonging. So it's about the lost bots learning that they're not missing their tribes, but they've formed their own family together. That's a different kind of conflict than the war conflict. That's the kind of story that BotBots has been telling so far.
Well, I also think it'd be interesting to, kind of expand the universe in general, kind of touch on some of those themes, because, now with CGI, you can do that, whereas, before it just wasn't necessarily practical. But I think that, some of the the various like world building and whatever, and the fact that like you've got Cybertron, but you have other planets as well. Bringing that into a either a 3D movie or a live action movie, I think would be somewhat interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a ton you can do to expand. I mean, again, let's look at what we've seen from other, in Batman and Superman's cases, 80-year franchises. Spider-Man is turning 60 this year as a franchise, and so you've seen those franchises expand. And I think when you look at what Spider-Man started off as being the comic book and being, the singular focus of the comic book for decades. And then, in the 90s, you had some expansions of that. And then that really came into fruition in the 2000s of this idea that we need to, in the 90s and 2000s, the comic book, world went through this whole big, like, we got to replace these characters. We've got to replace Clark Kent Superman with someone new. We've got to replace Bruce Wayne Batman with someone new. DC was doing that every 5 minutes, it seemed like. And then almost always what you had was the original character came back. And Marvel did it a lot in the 2000s where you had the Ultimates, universe that was started. And you had Ultimate Spider-Man die, and that's where we got Miles Morales from. And then look what you have is then you have movies like Into the Spider-Verse, where it's like, all right, not only do you have the main version of Spider-Man that's carrying his own movie, but now you have Miles Morales Spider-Man being the main character of a gigantically successful movie. And then a movie that had not just the Miles Morales version, but like other versions of Spider-Man, freaking Spider-Gwen, which was, a cool character, but it was more of just like, hey, this is a fun name and a cool costume, and that became a character. And I think that's what Transformers has kind of had to do, because the difference with, say, Transformers and Star Wars, and even to an extent Transformers and Batman and Spider-Man, is in the comics you have the same universe that's running all the time in the Marvel and DC universe. In Star Wars, you have one singular universe that's running all the time. All the stories, whether it's in The Mandalorian or in the current Marvel comics or in the movies, those are all in the same universe that has basically been being told since the late 70s. But Transformers is different. That Transformers has a ton of different universes, and you get 2 or 3 years of one universe, and then they stop that and give you 2 or 3 years of another universe. And I think at this point, the Bay universe is the longest lasting of all those universes. The least amount of screen time for the story when you add up all the movies. But when you say starting with the first movie till today, that's the longest running of all the Transformers universes from sheer number of years.
Well, but then you have to fight over if they're all related canon-wise or not. So, but let's just agree with you, because I want to.
Even if you say from the first Transformers movie to The Last Knight, that ran far longer than the G1 media did. The G1 toy line lasted maybe about the same time, but the G1 media only lasted a couple of years, 3 or 4 years.
God, that sucks. But you're right. And so why is the Transformers storytelling universe so fragmented? Because it's toy first, it's fiction second, toy line first, product led, fiction second, where everything else is everything else you mentioned is fiction first, product second. And that's what makes, for better for worse, that's what makes Transformers unique, baby. Like there's just nothing else. There's nothing else like it. It's very frustrating.
That would be an interesting question. If Transformers as a toy line fades away, could it exist still as a fiction? Could it exist purely as a fiction, like, granted,
I don't think so.
Spider-Man sells toys, and that
briefly. I think briefly.
Yeah, I think people would be they work. Still, they have not harnessed the power of the fiction and the toy line, like how they kind of synergize together. It's so difficult. Like we always talk about this, how it's so much so much easier to write the fiction and get like produce that as a piece, as a unit of like, as a widget compared to the actual widgets. You know, you can draw this hot rod and put him in a story or a cartoon way faster than you can put him into this form. So typically it's really hard to sync those up, where like the story that introduces this hot rod hits the shelf of the comic store when this hits the shelf at Target. That's just a bummer. That's just the way it works.
If you look at our contemporaries, like, you know, like G.I. Joe, that basically doesn't exist now. It had a movie last year. No one saw it. There's no toys. Who cares? Also, GoBots was gone forever. It had a comic at IDW because they're like, hey, we did Transformers. Maybe we can make this other robot thing happen. And it didn't. It was gone quickly and hasn't come back. I just think we could limp along like G.I. Joe has limped along. That could probably happen. But long term, without toys, no, probably not.
I don't know. I would be interested to see that, because my guess is that the majority of the people who saw the Bay movies didn't go out and buy the toys. A lot of them did, but there's a lot of people who also didn't go and buy the toys. And have we crossed that threshold now?
I think we crossed that threshold for Age of Extinction.
I think there's plenty of examples of when these things don't work together, everything falls apart. Which is like, just look at Rebirth from G1. You know, at least there were 3 episodes where they showed those headmasters and all the new toys that were coming out, Scorponok, Fort Max, and like then nothing. And when I found out there were Japanese episodes of that stuff, I like almost cried. I was like, oh my God. And I think Peter would say something like, all my friends were having adventures without me all this time. I didn't know. That was kind of how it felt. You know, like all these pretenders were actual things. Like it's like I had the toys, but they didn't really matter or exist because there was no story for me to enjoy them with. Sure, there was the comics, but I didn't read that shit. I didn't want to think. I just wanted to put my face up to the TV and watch them dance and run around and shoot lasers. And I could have done that if I lived in Japan. And that's when the toy line kind of fell apart, except for those cool animations in the commercials to try to sell you. That's all you got, was those like 5 seconds of animation in front of the toys. Animations. They were awesome. It's like, if you had that as a whole show, oh my God, I would have watched it a million times.
But that was 35 years ago, and that's when this was purely a kids thing. You didn't have multi-generations who were into this. And now you have that. And now I would say if Transformers as a toy line stopped, but you still had comic books, movies, and video games and TV shows, I think it could still exist. Maybe not as popular as it is today, but I mean, that's one of the things we were talking about last week with the partnership with Paramount. Maybe we're going to get more of that.
I mean, I definitely think the movies could exist on their own. Like you said, Phil, I don't necessarily know that they have to have, you know, a toy line. But, of course, in general, a lot of these movies, you know, a lot of any movie has a toy line just because that's a way, you know, products are a way to help support and fund the movie and all that. So
I think to do that, you'd have to get Hasbro to let go of Transformers and sell it to something else, sell a creative entity, or spin off another company that just handles creative things, which they kind of have with Allspark Studios, but not really. They license it out. For Paramount, they license it out to IDW, whoever, to make their creative stuff.
Wow, you know, that is an interesting idea, because like I look at what Ghostbusters is doing now, because they have this thing called Ghost World. Have you heard of this? It was like, it's like what? It's basically like Columbia Pictures basically branched off the franchise of Ghostbusters into its own company that handles everything involved with it, you know, outside of the movies and all this stuff. And I think that's just such a novel concept to do. Like, instead of like, oh, this company owns this brand, it's like, how about the brand owns itself in a way? Like, Hasbro obviously still has like the majority share in the company or whatever, but like it gives them a little bit, it would give whoever was involved a lot more autonomy to do things without being like oppressed by the corporate mandates of the rest of the organization that can definitely impede progress, as I've learned. I just think that'd be really cool, Christian. That's a good concept.
Hasbro's a toy company. They're not a creative company. Their primary objective is to make toys. So that's what they're going to do, and that's fine. That's what they're there for.
In a general sense, I would say you must be somewhat creative to be selling toys. But like you're talking about like legally distinct. The phrase creative
company.
Yeah. Like a creative company is like a design company. Like we brainstorm all day. Like that.
Yes, that's what I meant. Thank you. So yeah, I think spinning it off to something like Ghost World would be a way to keep it going if the toys ever stopped being profitable for them. Because it's a good, strong brand. We've seen that. It's been 40 years of consistent. There's always been Transformers. So realistically, there's probably always going to be Transformers, just like there's always going to be Superman or Batman or Spider-Man, like Phil said. It's a long-lasting brand.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a few questions because we never really got to my what are the core points of Transformers. So, can a Transformers story not have Cybertron?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any examples of that currently?
Bots.
But they
we'll
came
just use
from
Bots
Cybertron.
as every example.
We don't know that yet, I would say.
But and Christian, the way you describe it is that they are a lost tribe, so that's something that they got lost from Cybertron. So it sounds like the Cybertron is somehow
They got lost in the mall.
But where did they come from?
The mall.
I don't know crap about Bots.
Okay,
they're mutated by Allspark Storm. That's the story so far.
Okay.
They're mutated by a storm of Allspark energy that hit the mall one night. That's in the commercial. That's all.
Okay, so that Allspark probably came from fucking Cybertron. I'm just
but
throwing a bone.
Doesn't exist in their world, so we don't really know. And then we may never know. It may not be a thing. It may just be they're here.
Okay.
I will.
Okay.
If I can ask us to just pause on using Bots as an example, because the cartoon hasn't come out yet.
But it has fiction.
It's a very limited release of the fiction.
It has 3 commercials, a short comic that I haven't read.
Commercials don't count as fiction.
It gives you the introduction of what Bots are. That's fiction. Watch the thing.
Okay.
I mean,
it's animated.
Around the Space Knight had some more fiction than the Bots.
That's true.
Like
that is
my
that is
beer can has fiction, I guess, if you read the what it's made of,
No.
Okay. So let me rephrase it.
It's no Bots then.
So it sounds like you guys said Cybertron isn't a deal breaker. But we have
I guess
pretty much established it's in everything.
Cybertron is at this point one of the touchstones of what makes Transformers.
Where would they
think
have
it
come
is.
from if it wasn't for Cybertron? That's their home. So I guess again you could have like that Earthspark show but we don't know. I mean, I'm assuming Cybertron will still be. At least something will be said about Cybertron in the show, I'm assuming.
Well, I think inherently the press release kind of explains there is a Cybertron because these ones are different. They are not.
The
from
first
Cybertron.
one's born on Earth, so i.e. the other ones were born on Cybertron.
Yeah. Okay, so we're getting somewhere here though. So Cybertron to me sounds like it's pretty ubiquitous, but it also sounds like we're getting into the meat of it here. They are aliens from another planet. So is that a requirement for Transformers?
Yeah.
So they couldn't have a different origin, say a human-based origin. Like I've always wondered if like Transformers could flip the script and be like, there is no Cybertron, but some scientist creates AI that is a robot, like a sentient robot, and suddenly like that's how like that is the moment where now there's these robots on Earth and their human origin.
So Terminator.
Well, but they have their personalities and stuff. It's more like Johnny Five, I would say. But they transform somehow.
It's a good idea, but I don't think that's Transformers to me.
But what if the first one is Optimus Prime? I think
part of it is the whole aliens come to Earth and they have that whole fish out of water bit of story. That's important to me.
I don't know if the fish out of the water thing is important because it's like there's a lot of Transformers who are like, hey, we're on Earth. Like, cool. I like jazz music. In fact, that's my name, even though I, lived millions of years before it was created.
Okay, so that's another thing. How about the age thing? Why is it always going to be millions of years have passed? Why can't it just be like, oh, it's been about 40 years?
Because that added some gravitas to it all.
Yeah, that's weird. I've never gotten that either. Like, it means that it's been going on forever. But I feel like if your war has been going on for millions of years and you haven't figured out how to solve it or eliminate each other, you're doing a very bad job.
Well, in my fictitious origin here, that would alleviate the millions of years problem, because it would be, hey, the one day there was no sentient robot and now there is one and he wants to be a truck, and he's red and blue, and more sentient robots.
And how have they not ran out of resources at this point? Like, I would think warring for millions of years that, there'd be a bigger body count and, fewer resources.
Micromasters, the comic, explores that. It's interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, and IDW got into that, as well, that they went out to other planets to get more resources and all that sort of thing. And they were, mass manufacturing, basically, like, red shirts to go out and die.
So here's the next one. Autobots and Decepticons. Two factions.
You don't have
specifically
to
name that.
You don't have to name them Autobots and Decepticons. Beast Wars proved that, but you need to have good guys and bad guys.
Yep. Well, depends on the story you're telling. But probably.
Can the good guys be purple?
Sure.
That goes against what's been ingrained in our brains about what a good guy is supposed to look like color scheme wise. Good guys are primary colors because that was cheapest for them to print back in the day. You didn't have to mix colors to get blue, red, or yellow. And so the villains who didn't show up every single time were the inverse colors, the purples and the greens, because those colors were more expensive to make.
You're talking about the paint for the cells?
Yes. No, not the cells. I'm talking about like going back to the archetypes
of what
superheroes look like from comic books.
Oh.
No, this is going back to like Superman, Batman, that era where we got what we think of as an archetype for a hero and villain. Because it goes back to that day and age where it was literally like, it is cheap to use blue and red and yellow, and it is more expensive to use purple, green, and orange. Therefore, the good guys who are going to show up all the time are going to be some variation of likely blue and red and yellow.
This is an interesting concept, but I'm pretty sure that they only printed in black, yellow, magenta, and cyan, and mixed them to make those secondary colors, because that's how the color wheel works. So from a cost savings perspective, the only thing I'm questioning is your cost savings perspective. But I do agree that the primary colors are the most. There's a reason they're primary and secondary colors. You might as well make the primary characters the primary colors.
Right, and again, because that was also like from what I've read about the history of comic books, that is why one of the main reasons why Superman is red and blue.
Yeah, I believe it.
I've never considered that. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I don't know if that was the same that held true once we got to the Marvel launch of stuff in the 60s. But, at this point, it is thoroughly ingrained in our collective consciousness as Americans. A hero is going to be red, blue, or yellow.
Pretty true. That's why I've always found it strange that, like, that Starscream is red, blue, and white, red, and blue. Whereas Optimus Prime is too, but like he's the bad guy, even though he like looks kind of like a good guy in his.
Yeah, he's got
depiction.
more of the gray. Those are the accent colors.
Yeah, they've grayed him up over the.
Yeah.
So let's see. Let me come up with another one. So, Sentient. I think I know. I mean, this one is. I think this is the core of Transformers, but sentient robots.
Yeah.
Have to have that, right?
Have to have that.
Yeah.
Drones don't work. Like they are a
otherwise
different thing than a
otherwise
Transformer.
It's Gundams.
Yep. That's why in Transformers there are drones, and they are like distinct from, like Shockwave has all these drones on Cybertron, and we don't care about the drones other than that they're army builders or something. So,
yeah.
Any other? You guys got any question? Like debates?
I think at this point you have to have an Optimus Prime character.
Yeah, you've got to have some sort of like father hero type guy, or some sort of parent who is like wise and can tell you how to do things. The role model,
that archetype.
Yeah,
and you have to have a
young Bumblebee hotshot cheater.
Bumblebee hotshot, exactly.
Yeah, you have to see the world through the eyes of that younger character.
And I would probably go as far to say at this point that's been pretty darn solidified that character is Bumblebee.
Oh, here's one. Oh God, I already forgot it.
Nice.
Oh, I have a question.
Lord.
Is it more important to have Bumblebee in it or Optimus Prime?
Does it have to be those characters, or are you talking about those roles?
No, I'm saying those specific characters. Like, would if they had to cut one, do you think that they'd be more likely to cut Optimus Prime at this point or Bumblebee at this point?
Well, they tried that. They tried that with Robots in Disguise, but then they brought Optimus Prime right up.
And the Bumblebee movie and the Cyberverse cartoon started with focusing on Bumblebee.
Yep.
I would say it's a coin toss. I think no matter what you do, you're going to have. If Optimus Prime is not one of the central characters, then he will pop up. If Bumblebee is not one of the central characters, then he will show up at some point.
I think you could get rid of Optimus Prime, the character, but I don't think you could get rid of Bumblebee, the role. I think that has to be there every time.
Yeah, you got to have a main character that, like, a relatable main character, whether they're human or not.
I think that might be why Robots in Disguise 1 doesn't have as much staying power as the rest of them, because there is no main character like that.
I mean, Bumblebee was the young hero who's now trying to be the leader, and I think that's why you had
that's Robots in Disguise 2. I'm talking about Robots in Disguise 1.
I'm sorry.
He's talking about car robots, bro.
Yeah, car robots.
Transformers 2000.
Yep.
It was never its title.
For the real ones. For the evangelists out there.
Who's supposed to be your main dude for that? Like, Sideburn is vaguely positioned to be that, but like Sideburn, not really. Yeah. Koji is there like half the time. So like, who's your dude in that? There's no one to be that dude. I think that's part of the reason there's no staying power. The other part is licensing and rights issues, but we won't get into that part.
No, but you're right. From almost all the Transformers media, that is one that the storyline, I barely can remember what the storyline is, and I'm sure most fans, even the ones who do remember it, like Peter, aren't looking at it saying like, yeah, that was some good storytelling. It was like, no, these were cool toys, neat looking character designs, but beyond that, it was it was originally made for a Japanese audience, and yeah, everything else was sort of secondary.
Good serial storytelling, but yeah, it's different than anything else.
Yeah,
I remembered my other one that I forgot twice. Oh, I forgot it again. Just kidding. Do they have to be hiding? Do they have to be in disguise? Is that a requirement?
I don't think so.
I wouldn't say so.
Probably not, although I prefer it when they are.
The thing, I would agree with you guys on that, because most stories use the in disguise part as a lead in to start the story in the same methodology, which also requires a few things. That there is a reason to be hiding, which means there's other like races. Like you're on a planet where you don't want them to know you're there. as this robot that can transform, and it also begets the war. But then, if you don't have to be in disguise, why do you transform? So that is kind of a tough one. But I would agree that you don't need it, and that any Transformer story, like after it gets in the swing of things, it's a secondary aspect of the storytelling. Even like more than meets the eye comic, you're like everyone. The big joke about it is that they never transform, right? It's because it's a character story.
Well, they need to. They're not in disguise. They're
right.
They're among each other, so who cares?
One of my favorite things in that story is the transforming party when they're trying to get Rung to transform. That's just like so funny. It's like, yeah, we don't need to do this, but we're doing it. It's weird. Okay, sorry, Phil.
No, I mean, to me, the Robots in Disguise tagline was a marketing thing. It wasn't even part of the G1 story for the most part. They're running into like, power stations and the disguise stuff would come into play here and there. The Decepticons would sneak in somewhere with Soundwave usually.
It was subtle.
Yeah, but it was not like the Autobots weren't trying to hide their, the fact that they existed on planet Earth. Like they were out there like trying to like, oh, the Decepticons are attacking. We're gonna be in the middle of this city shooting at each other with lasers.
Then you get Hoist Goes Hollywood, where they're cast in a major movie. So like, yeah. So like, it's kind of thing. Everyone knows.
It's kind of funny how in G1, like everyone's just like, cool, alien robots hanging out all the time, but like, they in the the Bayformers, like that was an aspect of the story they really harped on, in progressively worse and worse ways as the story went on. But it kind of started out in the right place with like Sector 7 and like this underlying like secret of the universe that's been going on Earth. That was, their head was in the right place.
The Fallen took them public, so.
Yeah, when that happened, it's like, oh no. But then you had like Cemetery Wind showing up.
That was horrible. I think the best balance of that was in Dark of the Moon, but I think that was the best of the live actions anyway.
I haven't seen the movies enough time to remember all the story details.
Right. This is why we have Christian here.
Well, I guess most of the things we've highlighted, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just trying to put a cap on my thing I was trying to illustrate, was that the origin of the Transformers is alien. I think we've agreed on that. We've agreed upon sentient robots. We've agreed upon character. This is a big discussion, but the character archetypes. Some of them have to remain. And I would say all this stuff is still like the core G1 mythos, no matter how you slice it. And you can't, if these things are required to be Transformers, like, then what is G1 that other things aren't? Do you have an answer to that? Can you define some of those things? Are they purely aesthetic? Are they purely like 80s reasons?
So here's my question. If everything is truly G1, then why do we all fight about it? About it being too G1 or not G1 enough or just, whatever it may be.
I think that's just aesthetics.
Yeah.
It's because everyone picks and chooses aspects beyond the core things we just mentioned that matter to them personally and think it should matter to everybody. And then that's, it's basically like, I think this and you don't, I hate you. Sky cake. That's why we all get in fights.
I think, you're right on that, Paul, but I also think there is just this sense of what we've gotten a lot in the recent, going on 10 years now, where the mainline toy line has been almost slavish to the G1 character base and aesthetic. And so that when someone says it's 2G1, I think it is an aesthetic sort of commentary more than a this is too much like the basic storyline. And we really, really saw that with the Netflix shows and the toy lines associated with the Netflix shows.
But But yeah, I mean, but I would
Yes.
argue that they really do need a somewhat unified aesthetic so that, you don't get confusion with the brand of who's, Starscream or just whoever it
I
may be.
think that's what they're doing now.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And with
I
the
agree.
legacy stuff from what we've seen on packaging, Bulkhead and RC are listed as Prime Universe RC or Prime Universe Bulkhead or whatever. However, they're notated separately so that you're not getting like RC and RC and RC and RC confused because they're different characters, but they're similar characters. But they could all appear in Legacy in that kind of unified style. I'm okay with them all existing together because they are kind of all together, with the exception of live action movie stuff. They're, I think, the biggest departure aesthetically.
Yeah, and I was definitely one of those fans when I first saw the Starscream designs for the Transformers movie. I was just like, what the what? No, that ain't Starscream.
That was a painful day the first time I saw that.
Yeah. I mean,
I remember where I was.
I think I was in my office at work when I first saw it on a computer.
Well, and to add to that, like with the Bumblebee movie, where we saw the stills of Blitzwing, and you're all excited because you're like, oh, it's Starscream. You're like, wait, no, it's not Starscream, it's Blitzwing. So
yeah, obviously, the Bane movies were the biggest departure of how characters looked. Even you had some secondary characters like in the Unicron trilogy, like Ironhide did not look like Ironhide, that we had seen before.
That's like a distinctive dude. Like that's a different character.
Yeah. But I don't know. I think what we've seen since then is Hasbro realizing that there are, beyond just character archetypes, there are visual archetypes that need to be somewhat followed upon. Especially for the main characters of Optimus, Megatron, Bumblebee, and maybe Starscream in that now.
I mean, that is the easy route to go. But if that was like the only way to go, then we'd never have gotten animated Prowl.
Again, that's a secondary character. That's not a main character. And I think once you get away from the big 3 or 4, you can take more liberties.
An animated Prowl is definitely the exception more than the rule. It may even be the exception that proves the rule.
To me, the one that stands out the most, again, it's going back to the movies, is Grimlock. Because Grimlock's been universal, not just from his appearance, but transformation even, until, we really got you've got the RID Grimlock, who's a construction vehicle. But the Baver's Grimlock is distinctly different. Obviously, he's still a T-Rex, but the robot appearance is drastically different.
Yeah, Transformers really, the films really suffer from just 2 years too early. Like if they would have come out after Marvel went crazy and did everything right, they would have realized, oh, everything that was done before, we can still use that. Like we don't need to like laugh at it like it's a joke. Like the X-Men movies are like, oh, what should I wear? Yellow spandex? Just basically shitting on everything that came before that made it popular because they just thought they had to, because that, it's just the age gap was too wide there from the producers to the target audience. We just missed it. We skirted by just a little too early.
Yeah. No,
and Bay had his
about from that lens.
Bay and like Buenatera and Don Murphy, they had their claws stuck in the franchise and it was theirs. And they were still in that old school Hollywood mentality of like, the first Daredevil movie, the Tim Burton Batman, like we can re-aestheticize this and make it for a new audience and tell everyone that liked it before to fuck off. And that is great. And they will take our advice. Like, right, that was the moment before they found out that was wrong, and they kept doubling down on it, and it sucked. And now we're in an era where they're kind of like retconning it a little bit, which is it's still the same continuity. That's the best I'll give you, is that they're retconning it back to G1 the way it should have been.
Yeah,
I don't know. We're still in limbo with what Rise of the Beast will be and look like.
We just got a taste of what that shit's going to look like the other day.
Oh, with the Optimus Prime toy?
Did we already have like a Mirage that looks like Jazz or something? Wasn't that Rise of the Beast?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mirage has Jazz's alt mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Jazz is dead in the movie continuity.
Well, in Mirage, luckily Dino was Dino and not Mirage like he was originally supposed to be. Yes, so they can somewhat get away with this if you pretend the comics didn't exist.
And interestingly enough, the studio series was Dino. It was not Mirage. So I guess they're going to differentiate those characters.
Well, if you remember, Devastator and Brawl were the same dude as well. So
yes, I think Devastator was like leftover. He was always Brawl, just whatever.
But I just remember Michael Bay saying he was going to change that,
and then he didn't.
Of course, he wasn't. The film was already cut at that point.
Yeah, that was weird. That was a weird thing.
It's like, oh, thanks, bro. Think we're that stupid? Some of us.
At least Cats had the decency to go back and redo that animation.
So it sounds like overall the answer to the question is no, we're not going to move past G1, which was, kind of obvious from the beginning, but...
No, we're never going to move past the core tenets of what this franchise is.
Right.
Until people, vote with their wallets that they don't like it anymore, which, why would they?
Right.
It's like, oh, I love cake, and today I decided I hate cake, so I want to eat peanuts instead forever. That's just not the way humans work.
Well, it's not the way Hollywood works either, with, just how they do it with all these billion-dollar franchises. They're not going to throw it all out the window, so...
And I think that's where I'm kind of excited about what might be coming next from the comic books, because I feel like the comic books are the place where you can try out these new ideas.
Yeah.
And that's same to be said with what's gone on with Marvel. The comic books, you can do all these wild and crazy things because you don't have as big of an audience. And if it sticks, well then cool. We can bring this into the movie fold. We can put this on primetime. That's what happened with Miles Morales. He's worked in the comics, and so he'll work in the movies. Not everything worked in the comics, and so we've never seen an Azrael Batman in the movies. We've seen him in other media, but nothing to that extent. So,
but they are working on a Batman Beyond movie because that stuck with a lot of people.
Yeah. So it's one of those things though that the comic books tend to be more of the experimental lab.
It's the test kitchen.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. The test kitchen for story ideas and different things. And I think that's one of the reasons. I think that's why RID, and in More Than Meets the Eye were fun for a lot of folks, because that was a test kitchen that worked really well.
I think you also get the best pieces of non-specifically G1 things that get assimilated into the overall Transformers narrative. Like mini-cons are now part of it almost all the time. Bulkhead is a good example of a new character that got assimilated, Drift and Windblade 2. We pick these pieces out from that weren't originally part of the core, and you add them in, and it makes the franchise overall just better for it.
Yeah. Well, and since all those core essentials that we talked about are a piece of all these stories, it's really easy to assimilate them retroactively in. That's why it's really cool to see Lockdown in the Bayverse, even though he came from animated first, and he's completely different, and he's that was groundbreaking for me when he became the main villain. Holy shit. I mean, even the Fallen, that was sort of a IDW.
It's a Dreamwave thing.
Yeah, Dreamwave thing.
Wow, I forgot about that. Yeah.
And they totally said, fuck what came before. We might put some flames on him and make him black and orange, but that's about it. Other than that, he's an alien, totally wild. But I would love to see them change some of these. Like the next time they do a story, if they really want to have a different universe, but like all the like cut out or modify one of these core tenets that we are talking about, and it's a little harder to assimilate things back in. Like if Cybertron doesn't exist and say they are created on Earth for some reason, sure, you can have the same character with a different upbringing or a different origin, but it's kind of hard to like throw that back into a world where they're from Cybertron, if that is part of his character. And maybe his relationship with the creator is what defines that version of the character's story. You know, I don't know. I guess that would be a new universe, and that would not be G1, and it would be a lot easier to say, like, this is something completely different.
And I would say that's maybe why we haven't seen as much of the Rescue Bots integrated into other versions of the Transformers universe, because it was so far removed from what we had seen. And obviously that being a more kid-friendly audience, and that still being recent. But I do think, and Paul, you and I have talked about this, that, 10, 15 years from now, we might be getting masterpiece, Rescue Bot toys. Because that's what the nostalgia, hit's going to be aching for.
Or like Optimus Prime dies in the comic book, and it's a big deal because Heatwave is now the leader or something.
Yeah,
like some crazy stuff like that.
I do think that you could probably take the Rescue Bots, like this new Earthspark show. I think that you could see them integrated into that. I mean, I don't know that you could integrate them into a story with Cybertron necessarily, but an Earth-based show, I could see it somehow.
Transformers is tough. I would not want to write a Transformers story that other people had to read. I'll keep that in my little diary. That doesn't exist.
You want to share your Transformers fan fiction there, Paul?
I've done. What do you think I've been doing all night? It's as close as I'm ever gonna get. I don't actually write. I do not write fan fiction. Headcanon is the devil. Real canon is where it's at.
I prefer someone else to tell my stories to me.
Don't have time for that.
Yeah.
I like to drink from water fountains, sir.
Well, we spent a while exploring this topic here. Is there any other points that we want to add before we kind of wrap up for the night here?
I mean, I think coming back to what you said, Christian, Lucas, is that, we will, as you said, Duran suggested this, and I didn't want to do the topic at first because I thought it was very morbid, where it was like this idea, what happens when we all die? Because the Unicron trilogy came out 20 years ago, and 20 years from now, we'll be in our 60s, and we'll be dying off by then. I'm like, stop it. There's plenty of things that have outlived the original fan bases, and whether it's Mickey Mouse or the Tolkien books or you name it, Shakespeare. I'm not saying Transformers is Shakespeare, but there are plenty of things that have outlived its original fan base. And I think we're living in an age right now where that is even more likely than ever.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that these the core tenets of Transformers will probably stay very similar for the duration of that.
Enos, I like Enos' question. Like, is the transforming noise one of the core tenets of Transformers? Like, that it kind of is in my mind.
I don't think so. I think that really is dated. I think, especially when they throw that in the movies, I'm always like, oh, that's cool, but they do it like every movie, and I'm like, that's not very cool anymore. Like, I actually prefer the weird swishy like upswell sounds that they do in the movies. Like for the cartoons, it's great to have them go, but when you're trying to be realistic, like that sound makes no sense.
I know. I just made that noise so many times as a kid.
It's definitely iconic. I'll give you that. I don't think it's a requirement. I think maybe maybe a new unique transforming sound might be, on the table. Like, I don't think that they've really made a point to do that since. If there is a way to improve upon it or make it distinct, that might be neat.
Can we have a Transformers movie without a Linkin Park song?
We
Yes.
unfortunately have had several,
Okay.
and it made them worse.
Imagine Dragons was like the
Oh.
core band.
I don't want to imagine dragons. No, thank you.
No.
That movie was terrible.
My kid's gonna give you a hard time there, Christian, if you're talking smack on Imagine Dragons.
The
Good.
funniest part was the next movie had the dragons in it.
Yes, it did.
That's right.
Imagine Dragons.
And Michael Bay did.
Well, thank you guys for joining me tonight. I mentioned that the book club this week is going to be Transformers Salvation. So join them Sunday night at 9:30 Eastern, 8:30 Central on the TF Talk Discord to discuss it. And then thank you to everyone in the chat tonight. Thanks to Ron. Thanks to Zaldron. Thanks to Enots. Thanks to Daniel. Thanks to had a few other guys. JJ Prime Reviews. And thanks to Aaron Archer as well that stopped in earlier. So, but yeah. Well, thank you guys, and we will see you next week.
And also on Thursday for Microcasters.
Oh, and Thursday Microcasters as well.
New and improved Microcasters.
There you go. We might be going back to the old format for the week, so we'll see. We're trying.
We're working on it.
So. All right. Thanks, guys.